All right, everybody, we're diving back into Final Fantasy XIV, and this time we're doing another more relaxed video. Last time we were playing as the Dragoon and we were chatting about leveling. This time we're playing as the Red Mage and we're going to chat about balance. Game balance is a very hot topic in video games. It's something that is always debated and it's constantly being tweaked in every game genre. And in Final Fantasy XIV, balance is truly fascinating. There are so many different things to consider when balancing the different jobs and the different character classes in the game, and I have spent many nights lying in bed thinking about how different jobs can be balanced. And it all really started for me with the Dark Knight. When I was leveling through the Dark Knight, I was noticing that there were some holes and some issues with the job's kit, and I would constantly just, anytime I'm in the shower, anytime I'm in bed about to go to sleep, I would think to myself, well, what if they did this to the Dark Knight? Or what if they buffed this? Or what if they changed that? And that's something that is continuing to happen with all of the different jobs that I play. And it happened a lot when I was playing the Ninja, especially because the Ninja was so far the weakest job that I played, and it was also the one that I had the least amount of fun with. Not because the Ninja itself is boring, but simply because the Ninja is weak, I had a significantly hampered experience with it. I had a very bad time leveling the Ninja because I just knew I was super weak. And a lot of times when people talk about, oh, you know, I was looking at my numbers and they were low, someone will come out of the woodworks to say, well, if you're having fun, why should the numbers matter? And I think that's not a good way to think about it, because wait, did I mess something up? Oh, I missed because this guy is so high level that my attacks missed and my combo got messed up. Interesting. So the damage output is 100% something that can affect the amount of fun that you have on a particular job. And the perfect example of that for me is with the Black Mage. If you don't know, currently, oh, I leveled up, nice. My Black Mage is not even a Black Mage, it's a Thaumaturge, and it's level 26. So if that's not proof that I don't really like the job that much, I don't know what is. I've just never really cared that much for it. However, ever since patch 5.0, I've been looking at the numbers, and Black Mages are destroying stuff. They are blowing up the universe with their fireballs, and it looks glorious. And I want to get in on that action. I don't really care for the playstyle, but man, oh man, would it be satisfying to good dunk fireballs on enemies. And that's something very important. There should always be this appeal to things that goes outside of the playstyle. And that appeal is either in the form of power with the Black Mage, or for jobs like the Red Mage, it's utility, right? The Red Mage brings very cool utility. They have the ability to resurrect people. They have the ability to cure people with Vercure, which I'm going to need a lot of that while I'm fighting in this area that's higher level. But also, if you go into raid encounters and you're progressing for the first time, having the ability to swift cast and res somebody, that's valuable. That takes some pressure off the healers. It's nice. So this gives a reason to say, hey, you know what? Instead of playing Dragoon in this encounter, I'm going to play Red Mage so I can potentially clutch people back to life. And that's nice. But the problem starts to come in if the damage output that the Red Mage brings is so much lower than the damage output on other jobs like the Dragoon that the little bits of utility that you bring become invaluable. Not invaluable. But they become not valuable. Right? So I'm currently looking for one of those guys, the Tomati, but I'm not looking for the big boss version of it. I'm just looking for a regular one, and I'm pretty sure it's around here somewhere. Here we go. Found it. And a lot of times when this kind of stuff comes up, when discussions of which jobs are overpowered, because it's very easy to say that because you would, in general, want to use a Dragoon instead of a Red Mage, it's very easy to say that the Dragoon is overpowered. But I don't think that's the case. I think what's more true is that the Red Mage is just too weak. And after I kill this Tamati, I'm gonna try and make a case for why the Red Mage is too weak and the Dragoon is fine, or mostly fine, because there could be a little bit of room to nerf the Dragoon, but. Okay, I kind of just rolled my face on the keyboard and pressed a bunch of buttons, and I'm pretty sure I did stuff wrong there, but doesn't matter. So let's go in and find. First of all, let's find a safe spot so I don't aggro anything. But then I'm gonna go in and look at a couple of skills on the Red Mage and then a couple of skills on the Dragoon, because they have very similar toolkits in terms of the buffs that they bring to the table and the types of utilities that they bring to the table. So first up, we have Embolden. This is a 120-second cooldown, increases own magic damage dealt by 10%, and physical damage dealt by nearby party members by 10%. Both effects are reduced by 20% every 4 seconds, and this has a 20-second duration. It's a little bit weird, but okay. Like we talked about before, we have Vercure, so we have the ability to heal ourselves and other party members. And we have Verraise, we have the ability to resurrect dead people, so relieve some pressure off the healers again, or clutch the fight if both the healers die in a situation in a raid, then you can potentially clutch them back to life. Or if you're in a 4-man dungeon, your healer's asleep at the wheel, they died or something, you can res them, you can stabilize the fight. That's very valuable. Next, we have Manafaction. This is another damage buff, doubles the current black and white mana levels. Additional effect resets core a core, and displacement and engagement recast timers. All combos are cancelled upon execution of Manafaction. And when you unlock the level 74 trait, Enhanced Manafaction, the recast timer is reduced down from 120 seconds to 110 seconds. Big deal. And it adds the additional effect of increasing magic damage dealt by 5%, which I believe lasts for 10 seconds. I'm going to go check that real quick. Yes, the duration of Enhanced Manafaction's damage buff is 10 seconds. So keep all of this stuff in mind. We've got the 10% damage buff to self and physical damage on party members from Embolden, 120-second cooldown, 20-second duration. We've got Manafaction, 5% damage buff, and it has unique interactions with the Red Mage's black and white mana, so that's job-specific stuff. Now I'm going to switch over to the Dragoon and look at their kit. The Dragoon's kit is much more heavily focused on damage output, but something that you've got to consider is that damage is the definitive most important metric in Final Fantasy XIV. Utility is great, but damage is king, so that's something to remember. First up, we have the group buff Battle Litany, 180-second recast timer, so a little bit longer, but increases critical hit chance of self and nearby party members by 10%, 20-second duration. Very powerful. Next up, we have Lance Charge, 90-second cooldown, increases damage dealt by 15%, 20-second duration. So this is significantly more damage we're getting out of Lance Charge than from Manafaction, and the duration is longer. I'm seeing a little bit of problems there, but let's keep going forward. Next up, we have Dragon Sight. This is another damage buff. Grants right eye to self, increasing damage dealt by 10%. Also grants target party member left eye, increasing damage dealt by 5%, as long as the target is within 12 meters. Another 20-second damage buff. And last but certainly not least, we have Life Surge. 45-second cooldown ensures that your next weapon skill is a critical hit, and it absorbs a portion of the damage dealt as HP. So Dragoon has a lot of damage buffs, but they're not even just personal damage buffs. We got a very strong group damage buff for the entire party, and we've got a single target buff for yourself and another party member. That's a lot of damage focus in the kit. And what makes things worse, or better, depending on which side of the fence you're talking about, the Dragoon's personal damage buff is miles better than Manafaction. So the question then becomes, do we nerf Lance Charge? Do we nerf Life Surge? Or do we buff Manafaction? Do we go into the Red Mage and say, hey, wait a minute. Boom. The Red Mage's kit brings a lot of really cool stuff to the table. And we want, I say we like I'm developing the game, like I know how to code. The developers want players to choose between these jobs, not just because one is stronger than the other in terms of damage output, but they want players to say, okay, the Dragoon does a lot of damage, the Red Mage does less damage, but they also bring resurrection and healing to the table, so that's a good reason for me to want to play the Red Mage. But right now, because the damage is so skewed towards the Dragoon, they do so much more damage than the Red Mage. People look at the Red Mage's unique utilities, the ability to resurrect, and they're like, just get good and don't die, and I'll be Dragoon, and we'll do it that way. But that's a really bad state to be in. But also, I don't think bringing the Dragoon down to the Red Mage's level is necessarily the correct answer. Because if you nerf the Dragoon without touching the Red Mage and giving it buffs in some regards, then what you've done is you've pissed off a lot of Dragoon players that are rocking and rolling and having a good time. And that's not good. Right? Because if you talk to any Dragoon player right now that considers themselves a Dragoon main, they take it into the raids, they use it in dungeons, Dragoon is their life. They're not going to tell you that the Dragoon is overpowered. They're going to say, dude, I'm having so much fun with this job. I do so much damage. It feels great. And that's what you want. And what you want to have also is when someone is playing the Red Mage, you want them to say, dude, my damage feels really nice, man. But also, yesterday when I was in the raid, I saved the day. I clutched it with my resurrection. If I was playing Dragoon, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And you never want the question to come up like, is my damage so low that it doesn't even matter that I can save people with res? Because that's what we're in right now. We're in that place where the cool, unique things that we bring to the table don't really matter. And I think I'm pretty much done with these pages. I'm not going to go to the Tempest, but what I can do is pick up some more from the Crystarium. So I'm going to go there and do that because there's still more to talk about. So my point is, nerfs are... I don't believe that nerfs are the way forward for Final Fantasy XIV. Because all of the jobs that players set their sights on for nerfs feel really good. And nerfing them, especially if you change the way that their rotations function by increasing cooldowns and things of that nature, it'll just make them feel bad. So, in my mind, it is better to buff the weaker cast members, because there's a lot of cast members in Final Fantasy's roster that could use some buffs, as opposed to nerfing the guys that are really strong. Especially if the nerfs would do something to negatively impact the gameplay loop of a certain job. Because I was thinking the other day that one way you could nerf the Dragoon is by increasing the cooldown of jump. And oof, I kind of shudder at the thought of that, because the whole purpose of the Dragoon is to jump. And if that had a longer cooldown, that would have a couple of different negative effects. It would force you to... It would slow down the rate at which you can enter Life of the Dragon, and that would reduce the amount of times you get to use the Norvrandt ability, which would significantly reduce your damage output, because Norvrandt is one of the biggest factors in the Dragoon's DPS. So something as simple as increasing the recast timer on jump would have huge ramifications across the damage output of the Dragoon, but it would also negatively affect the way the job feels, because right now you're a jumping machine. It's just wild and crazy. You're always rocking and rolling. You've always got a button to press, and doing something to get rid of that, I think, would do way more harm than good, because that would just, again, it would just piss off a bunch of Dragoons. It's like, dude, I play the Dragoon to jump around all the time. Why are you increasing the cooldown of jump? But then there are more subtle ways to balance the Dragoon. Like I mentioned, Norvrandt is one of the biggest contributors to the Dragoon's damage output. If they nerf that potency by a little bit, then okay, the Dragoon gets brought up more in line with the rest of the cast. But at the same time, is that correcting the problem? And is nerfing the Dragoon in that way making me want to play the Red Mage? Not really, is the answer. And we're talking a lot about, I'm talking a lot about the Red Mage because I'm playing it right now. But here's another question that'll probably blow your mind a little bit. How much would you have to nerf the Dragoon to make me want to bring a Dancer instead of a Dragoon? The main reason I don't want to play Dancer is because it's super weak. its damage output is just really weak. And the type of person that I am, I like to put up big numbers. I like to be somewhere in the top 3. And the Dancer's just never going to put me there. Now, I understand it gives really good buffs and it supports the team and blah, blah, blah. But there's a limit to that kind of stuff in Final Fantasy because of the way the game is designed. Like, unless I'm turning somebody into a god in terms of their damage output, then I don't really care. So in my mind, buffing the Dancer's damage output would be a good way to make it feel more in line with some of the other jobs in the game that are just stronger. But that one's kind of weird, though. The buffing the Dancer would probably be really difficult because they have so many group buffs, and the developers would have to contend with that. Oh my gosh. I've got two guys on me. Let's heal up a little bit. Okay, I've got 80. Let's do that. And then do that. And then do some of that. There we go. Okay, I survived. But this right here, healing myself and keeping myself alive like this is something that I wouldn't really be able to do if I was playing the Dragoon. The Dragoon does have sustain, but it's not on the level of the Red Mage. Again, you want the questions to come up when you're forming a team to go into the raid, whether it be normal or savage. What do I value most in this situation? Do I want to have a little bit more damage output, or do I want to bring the safety net? Because the safety net is still kicking ass. It's just not kicking as much ass. Really though, it's interesting, and I personally, I don't know exactly what the Final Fantasy XIV developers are gonna do to find that sweet spot of balance. I don't know if they're gonna go in and say, you know what, the Dragoon is too strong. We are gonna bring it down. I don't know if they're gonna say, hey, the monk is too strong. We're gonna bring it down. Because that's certainly gonna make some people upset, but it could be for the better. It could be the right decision. But by my estimation, if they nerf the guys that are at the top without doing anything to the guys at the bottom and the guys in the middle, then they're going to wind up with a situation that is just as volatile as the one that they currently have. And volatile is a word that is much too colorful for this situation, but I think you get the point. I think one of the things that makes balanced discussions so difficult to have, especially online on forums and things, is the fact that people do use very colorful language when talking about game balance. Because the word volatile is not something I would use to describe the state of game balance in Final Fantasy XIV. I think it's just not ideal. I totally messed up there. Like the state of the game is just not ideal. It's not horrible, but it's not as good as it could be. But if you go onto the forums, which sometimes I do, I go into the Final Fantasy XIV official forums and their Reddits to just read around and see what people are talking about and discussing. And man, you would think the world is coming to an end. I read a post about the Dragoon, the Dark Knight, on the official forums a couple of months ago, back when 5.0 first launched, and the guy said something to the effect that he was like, oh, I've been a Dark Knight main for a really long time, and I'm not going to play the job anymore until it's been made to be not a complete pile of steaming garbage. And fast forward a couple of months later, and Dark Knights are being used in the world's first raid clear. So it's like, maybe you were overreacting a little bit. Maybe the language was a little bit too colorful. But with that in mind, there's still a lot of things in the Dark Knight's kit that could use improvements. And I've talked about these on a couple occasions in my comment section and even in my Dark Knight video. So we're changing zones now to Eorzea, and then I'm going to continue talking about the Dark Knight and how that could be balanced, and maybe talk about the tank balance a little bit, because tank balance is a little bit different from DPS balance. Because with the damage dealers, the main thing that you focus on is damage output, because that's what their purpose is. Their purpose is dealing damage. So even for a job like the Red Mage that brings these unique utilities like Raise and Cure, they still have to output a certain level of damage for those extra utilities to be considered valuable. But with the tanks, it's a little bit different. They do still have to put out a certain baseline of damage, but the ways in which they defend themselves are also very important to how they're balanced. And with the Dark Knight is the lowest damage dealing of all the tanks currently, based on the stuff that I've seen on FF logs. You know, you can point to specific resources that say otherwise, but based on what I've seen, the Dark Knight is the weakest tank in regards to damage dealing, but it has ridiculously strong damage mitigation tools in the Blackest Knight. And the Dark Knight's mitigation tools are specifically designed for fighting against single targets. They excel at fighting a single target, especially if that target is doing magic damage. And I've talked about this a lot, and I don't feel like talking about Dark Mind. It is what it is. But my point being, the Dark Knight's damage output is lacking, but it gets kind of made up for by the fact that their defense is redonkulous. Tank Busters getting reduced to 0 damage dealt is a huge value point. So let's say the Dark Knight is main tanking. Tank Busters coming in. They activate the Blackest Knight and Dark Mind because they're edgy, and the Tank Buster is dealing magic damage, right? Their support, their co-tank, let's say it's a Paladin, they use Rampart and Intervention. You take 0 damage from a Tank Buster that's otherwise going to hit you for like 40,000 damage, and then the boss's next auto attack does like 2,000 damage or something like that. That is huge mitigation. That's leaving the healer more room to DPS, and that's a huge value point for the Dark Knight. But at the same time, despite them being so powerful defensively, especially against bosses, the Dark Knight actually feels kind of bad in dungeons because they don't have the same tools that other tanks have to deal with dungeon pulls and physical mitigation. And that's a bit problematic. That's something that anybody will tell you that needs to be corrected. That's definitely something that I've gotten slightly annoyed with regards to the Dark Knight, is that in dungeons I feel a little bit weaker than I should feel. But yeah, the Dark Knight does not feel very good in dungeons. But as soon as I get to the boss fights when I'm playing as the Dark Knight, then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm rocking and rolling now. I'm using the Blackest Knight. I'm taking that 0 damage on the chin like a gangster, and I'm moving on. I'm shrugging it off. Nothing affects me when I'm playing the Dark Knight, and that's really cool. But then as soon as I start pulling multiple trash enemies, multiple packs of trash enemies, I start to be like, oh god, I'm taking a lot of damage here, and I don't have the tools to deal with it. And this is where the developers of Final Fantasy XIV run into problems, because a lot of times they take a really conservative approach to designing abilities. So let me switch over to the Dark Knight just to kind of show this off a little bit, and then we'll switch back to the Red Mage and keep killing some stuff. Send him back to the Shadow Realm. So with the Dark Knight, again, we have very strong tools for tanking against bosses. We've got Dark Mind. Most bosses in the game deal magic damage at some point, so this button has a lot of value. We've got Rampart, we've got Shadow Wall. Those are the universal mitigation tools, and then we've got the Blackest Knight, which is redonkulously strong. We take that 0 damage on the chin. Now, as soon as we go into a trash pack, all we have is the Blackest Knight, Rampart, and Shadow Wall. So we've got, and of course we have Arm's Length, but that's a universal cooldown, so we're not really talking about that. You're riding on the struggle bus when you're tanking just a regular dungeon pull. The main thing that you have at your disposal, outside of your standard stuff that everybody else kind of has, is Abyssal Drain. And this is an ability where I look at it and I think, okay, the developers were obviously being very conservative with this because it has the potential to snowball. But this is an ability that I think should have been allowed to snowball. So Abyssal Drain deals damage with a potency of 200 to a target and all nearby enemies, and it restores 200 potency HP based on every target hit. So we send this out against a group. We're getting a lot of health. That was 16,000 health that I just gained there. And if I was in a dungeon pull against 10, 15 enemies, it just keeps scaling up and up and up. So I understand why the developers looked at Abyssal Drain and they said, we don't really want this ability to have a crazy cure potency. but it kind of should. And I'm going to tell you why right now. I'm going to get out of combat first, and then I'm going to switch over to the warrior. And I hope, please? Okay, good. My cooldown's reset, and I have to bring my chocobo back onto the field because I need him for something. I've got this cool ability called Nascent Flash. And this ability allows me to heal for a portion of the damage I deal as HP. And the conversion is 50% of the damage I deal gets converted to HP. So I've got this ability called Chaotic Cyclone. It's a 400 potency direct crit to all nearby enemies. Right? Nascent Flash, use Chaotic Cyclone. I heal for 8,600 HP per target hit. That scales up tremendously. If there are multiple targets, if I'm doing a wall-to-wall dungeon pull and I've got like 15, 20 enemies smacking me at the same time, I can literally go from 1 HP to maximum. If they're going to let the warrior do that, which they should, by the way, because it's awesome, they should allow the Dark Knight to do that as well. Abyssal Drain's cure potency, in my mind, should be 600 at least. That way it's got pretty good functionality against single targets, but against a large group, it's huge. My point is, something that I believe that the Final Fantasy XIV developers need to do is they need to, in some cases, for skills like Abyssal Drain, they need to say, let's kind of throw balance out the window a little bit, in the sense that we should allow this ability to get out of control in certain situations, because that could be really fun. Because part of the fun of the warrior is, I'm going to switch back to Red Mage. Part of the fun of warrior is that when you're pulling large groups in a dungeon, it snowballs out of control with the amount of healing that you can do to yourself with Nascent Flash. And then against single targets, it's not as valuable, but you can still get some pretty big value out of Nascent Flash when you're fighting against bosses. With good timing, you can use Nascent Flash and Inner Chaos to heal back for like 20,000 HP, and that's pretty big. I suppose the moral of the story is the developers need to find a way to allow certain skills and abilities to really shine in specific instances and almost get out of control in certain spaces, while also keeping other things under control. And that really is the moral of the story. I think that's the concept that I've been working to this whole time, is that some abilities and some things need to be allowed to be crazy and nutty and insane, and then other things need to be kept in check and tamed. You know, looking at the Dragoon, there are things in the Dragoon's kit that the Dragoon could be tamed a little bit, and it would be perfectly reasonable. But somebody left me a comment the other day, and I absolutely love the language that was used to describe this. They said that the Dragoon is head and shoulders above so many other DPS that it needs to be brought down. That was the sentiment of it. I love the language that was used there. It's very very clever and very colorful. I like that expression, head and shoulders above. But something that has to be considered is, if we're bringing the Dragoon down, is that actually going to make other choices more appealing? Listen, the only way you would get me to play the Dancer instead of the Dragoon is if you delete the Dragoon from the game. And that's not going to happen, so why don't we just buff Dancer, is what I'm trying to say, okay? And there we go, man. That's going to do it for the chat for today. I ended up rambling for another 15 minutes or so, but things started to get a little bit incoherent, so I'm going to cut it here. But I would love to continue having this conversation with you guys in the comments section. So if you have any thoughts about the balance in Final Fantasy XIV, are there too many skills that are conservative? Do things need to be more rambunctious, or should everything be brought to a much more tame level? Is the Dragoon actually overpowered? Is the Black Mage too strong? Is the Monk too strong? Is the Dancer too weak? All of these things are questions that I would love to have debated in the comment section. So if you have any thoughts about this stuff, be sure to drop it down there, and I will read them and reply to them as quickly as I can. So with all of that said, we're going to wrap things up here by saying the name of the game is Final Fantasy XIV. The name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.